I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend Nicole again, who's going to introduce Abigail McGuire from Womanspace, who will be delivering you the next presentation on domestic violence. So take it away, Nicole.
So Abigail, if you want to put your camera on, and I will introduce you.
All right, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
So thank you, Abigail. So Abigail McGuire is the children's specialist at Womanspace, a nonprofit agency in Mercer County, providing a comprehensive array of services to individual families impacted by domestic violence and sexual violence. Womanspace mission is to prevent abuse, protect families, and change lives through empowerment and safety net of supportive services. As the children's specialist, Abby provides counseling services to children ages 5 and up who have been impacted by domestic violence. She also supports non-offending parents in navigating the parenting challenges that arise in families to begin to heal from abuse. Thank you and welcome, Abigail.
Thank you so much for having me, and good morning, everyone. So thank you for inviting me to speak on such an important topic. So this morning I wanted to speak about domestic violence and the impact that it has on children. But before I get started, I just want to acknowledge that this can be a heavy topic, and so please take care of yourself however you need to during the presentation. And I've included some phone numbers for Womanspace Services as well as other domestic violence agencies throughout the state. So if you or someone you know may be impacted, please don't hesitate to reach out for services. We're here and able to help. So I wanted to first start out by kind of giving some statistics on domestic violence to kind of help give a scope of the issue at hand. So Nicole, can you go to the next slide, or should I? Oh, perfect. So on average, 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the United States, which translates to about 12 million Americans per year. 4 in 10 women and 4 in 10 men have experienced at least one form of coercive control by an intimate partner during their lifetime. 43 million women and 38 million men have experienced psychological aggression or emotional abuse by an intimate partner. And statistically, the demographic that is most commonly abused by an intimate partner is women between the ages of 18 to 24. So Nicole, if you go to the next slide, this is an equal opportunity crime. Domestic violence can happen to anyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of gender, religion, education, race or ethnicity, or sexual orientation. So while there are more women who are victims of domestic violence and men who are perpetrators of abuse, the reverse is also true. So women can be abusers, men can be victims. This is also an issue that affects the LGBTQ community. And in fact, there is a higher percentage of lesbian and bisexual women who are victimized than heterosexual women. And likewise, there is a higher percentage of gay men and bisexual men who are victimized than heterosexual men. So unfortunately, this is something that can happen to anyone. So what is abuse? What do we mean when we are talking about abuse? So this is a pattern of behavior where one person in a relationship tries to exert power and control by using fear and intimidation. So this is not an isolated incident. This is something that is a pattern of behavior, usually increasing in severity and frequency over time. So it might start out very subtly. It usually is not going to start out, from the very beginning with physical violence. It usually builds up to that. So it may not always result in physical violence, but in cases where there is physical abuse, if you look back there were behaviors kind of leading up to that. So sometimes it starts off with kind of subtle controlling behaviors that might look like jealousy. It might even be flattering at the beginning of the relationship, because it might seem like, oh, this person loves me so much. They want to spend all of their time with me. And over time, those behaviors become more overt and more dangerous, and can ultimately result in physical or sexual abuse. So when we think of domestic violence, the most obvious example is physical or sexual abuse, but abusers may use other tactics to try and gain that power and control. So they may be emotionally or verbally abusive towards their partner, putting them down, calling them names, humiliating them. They might even kind of play mind games. So if you have heard the term gaslighting, that's kind of behavior that is meant to make the other person feel crazy. So when that happens, the abuser might kind of deny or dismiss any of the abuse, kind of deny any responsibility, or say, you know, what are you talking about? You're making that up. I never said that. You're being overly sensitive. So when that happens over and over and over again, that can lead the victim to doubt themselves, but it also results in them being less likely to talk to somebody about what's going on for fear of not being believed, which then further isolates the victim. Isolation is a huge component of abuse, where an abuser may really control who that person is allowed to speak to, controlling their activities, where they're allowed to go, with the goal of kind of cutting them off from that support system. So during these past few months, when we've all been kind of stuck at home, that isolation can be even further compounded. So when we're talking about that isolation, it also can become a barrier for someone seeking help, because they may no longer have those same friends and family members available to them. It also can sometimes be harder to recognize the abuse, because they don't have those friends and family members kind of pointing out, oh, I didn't like the way they were speaking to you. So isolation is a big part of this as well. In terms of spiritual abuse, an abuser may try to use scripture to justify their abuse. So they may find Bible passages that suggest that women should be subservient to men. They might also threaten their partner that if you leave me, the faith community will disown you or shun you. So that can contribute to that abuse as well. Sexual abuse can be a tactic of that power and control, and that coercive control as well. So to be clear, regardless of the relationship, regardless of whether two people are married, if one person is not willing to participate in sexual activity, they do not have to. So abusers will often try and make somebody feel like they owe them whatever sexual activity they want to engage in, but any non-consensual sexual activity, regardless of the relationship, is abuse. We also often see financial abuse or financial control, which can make it harder for someone to leave. And by financial control, we're talking about preventing somebody from working outside of the home, kind of actively sabotaging their employment if they are working outside of the home. Maybe they're showing up to the person's place of employment and causing a scene. They might be calling nonstop throughout the day to kind of check up on them. They could be accusing their partner of having an affair with their coworkers. So ultimately that can be detrimental for that person's career, and can interfere with the ability to have a job. Likewise, sometimes an abuser might have all control over the finances. So they might make the other person have an allowance where they have to ask for whatever it is that they need. They also might kind of purposely ruin their partner's credit. So down the road, it's harder to rebuild, it's harder to be independent because of the financial decisions that their abuser made. And finally, with digital abuse, this is something that's become more common over the past decade or two as technology and social media have become more prolific. So an abuser might use technology to kind of monitor their partner's activities. They might kind of go through their text messages to see who it is that they're talking to. They might even kind of use the location feature on social media to find out where they're going to be. Are they where they said they were going to be, and who's there with them? An abuser might also use technology to threaten or harass their partner. They might threaten or actually go through with posting compromising photos or details that are shared in a relationship that maybe that person doesn't want everybody to know. So kind of using technology to blackmail their partner in an effort to control them, to make them do what it is that the abuser wants. So this next slide shows this power and control wheel. So this is kind of that model of domestic violence where at the very center, it's always about power and control, and each spoke of the wheel shows a different tactic, with the threat of physical or sexual violence being kind of either overtly or maybe less, more subtly suggested. So you can see there we have intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and actually blaming the victim for the behaviors of the abuser, using the children against their partner, economic abuse, using male privilege to be the one who determines the roles in the relationship, and then coercion or threats. So all of these are different tactics that an abuser may use in order to gain that power and control over their partner. So this next slide I included just to show legally the definition of domestic violence in New Jersey. So this is a bit of a narrower definition than what I just talked about. But in New Jersey, there are 19 different crimes listed there that fall under the umbrella of domestic violence. So if someone were to seek out a restraining order against their abuser, they would have to show that one of these 19 offenses occurred, and the perpetrator was either a current or former partner in a romantic relationship, that there's a child in common with the perpetrator, or that it was a current or former household member. So that could be another family member. It could also be a college roommate, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic partner who is the abuser in order to get a restraining order, but it does have to be someone that you shared a residence with. So why not just leave? That's something that victims hear quite often. You know, if it was so bad, why didn't you just leave? Or why didn't you leave sooner? But there are many barriers to leaving. So Nicole, if you can go to the next slide. One of the primary concerns that a victim might face when, if she's thinking about leaving, is safety. So the most dangerous time for victims of domestic violence is when she or he is preparing to leave. So as soon as that abuser recognizes that they're losing some of that control, they may escalate their tactics. They might kind of up the ante, so to speak, which is why safety planning at all stages is so important. Likewise, there are a lot of practical reasons why it might be hard to leave, or why someone might be afraid to leave. So financial resources, especially if there's been financial abuse, or if someone has not been able to work outside the home, it can be very daunting to try and figure out, how am I going to support myself? How can I be financially independent? Where am I going to live? How am I going to get childcare for my children? And if they've been prevented from having a job, the very act of going out and getting a job can be difficult. So all of those pose barriers for victims as well. And then in terms of emotional and psychological barriers, if someone has been has heard over and over again that they're worthless, or they're lazy, when they're hearing all of this emotional abuse, you may start to believe it. So they may feel that they can't cut it without the abuser, that they just don't have the strength to go out and to leave the abuser. The abuser may have told them that nobody else is going to want you if you leave me. And so they might feel that that's true. So there's a sense of learned helplessness that can come from years and years of emotional abuse. Like I said, that isolation can be a huge barrier to leaving. So once that support system has been cut out, that person is going to naturally have to depend on that abuser more, because they don't have the same friends and family members that they had before to lean on. So that can certainly cause someone to be, if I leave, where am I going to go? That fear of being alone. The fear of the abuser is also important. Like I said, with the safety concerns, many abusers will threaten, if you leave, I will kill you, or if you leave, I will kill myself. So there's that inherent fear of what is he capable of if I leave. Finally, women may, or victims of domestic violence may be concerned about breaking up the family. So they might be concerned about being a single parent. What's going to happen to the kids if I leave? And that may be reinforced by family members or members of the community that really are encouraging them to stay together for the sake of the kids. And it's also worth pointing out that victims of domestic violence may also have love for the abuser. They may hate the abuse, want it to end, want those behaviors to stop, and still have love for that person that they fell in love with. So they might hold out hope that the abuser can change, that if they get them the right services, if they get them counseling or anger management services, if only the abuser would stop drinking, then everything would be okay. So there is some trauma bonding that takes place when a victim and the abuser have gone through an incredibly traumatic ordeal together. Even though one person is inflicting that on the other, there is trauma bonding that occurs that can kind of heighten those emotional attachments. So all of these can be barriers to leaving. On average, it takes a victim of domestic violence 7 tries to successfully leave their abuser, whether that's not being able to follow through with leaving, or leaving and going back to the abuser. So on average, it takes 7 tries to leave the abuser. So while people might be very well-meaning by saying, well, you should leave the abuser, that's not always helpful to the victim because it's not always possible. It's not always safe right now to leave. So the most important thing that you can do if someone that you care about is in an abusive relationship is, number 1, to believe them when they talk about what's happening, and 2, connecting them with resources and information so that they have the tools to make the best decision for themselves. We want to empower survivors of domestic violence to take control of their own lives. When you've had that power and control taken from you in a domestic violence relationship, kind of building them back up so that they can be in control of their destiny is so important. So safety planning, connecting them with resources, but ultimately letting them decide what's best for them and their family, and being around if and when they come to you for help. So I wanted to just briefly go over some of the services that we provide at Womanspace. Again, with empowerment being our overarching goal. So we have emergency services available in the form of a 24-hour hotline. We also have emergency safe housing available. We can accommodate up to 8 women and 14 children who need that immediate safe place to stay. Right now at Womanspace, we only have accommodations for women and children at our facility, but if a male was coming seeking safe housing, we would advocate for him at a different county in New Jersey, or we would be able to place him in a motel. So safety is the primary concern. We also have some crisis intervention services available. We have a wonderful domestic violence victim response team and sexual assault support services, which are run by our volunteers who go through 80 hours of training on the dynamics of domestic violence and sexual assault. So they can come meet with victims either at police stations or at the hospital. We also offer counseling and support services for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. So we offer individual counseling for women, men, and children. We have some support groups, as well as court advocacy for people who might be going through the final restraining order process, as well as legal clinics to provide legal guidance around divorce, custody, any family law issues. And then finally, we do offer transitional housing for clients who may need some longer term housing while they work to meet their goals to gain safety and stability. So these are some of the services that we provide. And again, Womanspace is the domestic violence and sexual assault agency in Mercer County. And I know some of you may be joining from throughout the state. So the next slide shows some of the other agencies that are available. So each county in New Jersey, all 21 counties, has a designated domestic violence and sexual assault agency. So if you are looking for services close to where you are, you can find more information about your county's services online. So that's a lot of information. And I wanted to just kind of pause here as we kind of transition into how all of this impacts children. So I'll save some time at the end for questions. And again, you can always reach out to me directly if you have further questions or need some guidance around domestic violence. So in terms of children and domestic violence, kind of how they fit into the equation, again, just some statistics to kind of shed some light on the scope of the issue. 40 to 60% of men who abuse women also abuse their children. And again, I want to stress here that both men and women can be abusers. Both men and women can be victims of domestic violence. However, when we're talking about how this impacts children, it is more often the case that the abuser is dad or mom's partner, and mom is the victim of domestic violence. So I might kind of default to that language, but please know the reverse can be true. So 1 in 15 children are exposed to domestic violence each year, and 90% of these children are actually eyewitnesses to the violence. So that translates to 5 million children witnessing domestic violence in the US each year. 15.5 million children in the US live in families in which domestic violence occurred at least once in the past year, and 7 million children live in families in which severe domestic violence occurred. And finally, children in homes with violence are at a higher risk of being abused themselves. So they're physically abused or seriously neglected at a rate 15 times higher than the national average. So there is quite a correlation between domestic violence and other types of violence as well. So what children are at risk? Who are we talking about here? So Nicole, if you move to the next slide, we know that domestic violence often begins or escalates during pregnancy. So if there was domestic violence prior to a pregnancy, more often than not, it will continue into the pregnancy and when the child is born. But it also can begin during that pregnancy. So if an abuser recognizes that their partner's focus is shifting towards their newborn baby or their soon-to-be born baby, they might kind of get the sense that they're losing that power and control, and so they may escalate their tactics of abuse. Almost half of incidents of domestic violence occur in homes with a child under the age of 12, and children under the age of 6 are at a higher risk than older children for exposure to domestic violence. So I wanted to just differentiate for a moment the difference between witnessing abuse and being exposed to abuse. So witnessing domestic violence implies that the child was kind of directly there and saw or heard the violent incident. Whereas exposure to domestic violence is a bit of a broader term, where they may not ever witness directly what happened, but they're still impacted by it. So oftentimes I'll hear from non-offending parents that, you know, my child was never in the room, they aren't impacted, they don't know what's going on. So while it's great that that child was never physically in the room and never in harm's way, it's not true that they're not impacted by it, and it's probably not true that they're unaware of what's happening. So children are little sponges. They're taking in everything, and often they are aware of more than we give them credit for. So if any of you have had the experience where you thought your child was watching TV and not paying attention, but then is repeating a conversation that they overheard you having on the phone, you know that this is true. So especially if a child feels like they're not supposed to be hearing something or they're not supposed to be seeing something, they're gonna perk up and they're gonna kind of zone right in. So even when a child does not witness directly an abusive incident, chances are if there is domestic violence taking place in the home, they are exposed to it. So some ways that children can be exposed to domestic violence. And Nicole, if you want to move to the next slide there. So unfortunately, even in utero, if a mother is being abused during pregnancy, that fetus is exposed to domestic violence. So this might be in the form of physical abuse directed at the expectant mother's belly. It also could be that an abuser prevents her from getting the prenatal care that she needs, which could have medical implications for that baby once it's born. So then once that child is born, especially for the younger children, you know, infants and toddlers, they may be exposed to domestic violence by themselves being hit or threatened while their mom is holding them. So they may not be the intended target of abuse, but because they are right there with their mom, they might kind of be caught in the crossfires, so to speak. So children are exposed to domestic violence when they hear threats of physical harm, if they hear or see an assault on their mother. But they also may be exposed by seeing the aftermath of a violent incident. So maybe they see injuries on their mother. They also could see broken furniture, destroyed property. They may actually see police coming to the home, or the abuser being arrested. So all of these are ways that they are aware that something bad has happened. They also could kind of on the front end feel the tension building prior to an assault. So they may kind of have that experience of walking on eggshells, of kind of feeling that tension and internalizing that anxiety, that worry, that something's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Some abusers may actually force a child to watch or participate in the violence against their mother. And children may feel that if they don't do what the abuser says, that abuse is going to be directed towards them. So they may feel that they have no choice but to kind of carry out his bidding. Likewise, an abuser may enlist the child to align against the mother, so kind of being forced to choose sides, which then has implications for their relationship with their nonviolent parent. And finally, children can be exposed to domestic violence because they're denied care, because their mother is injured or dealing with her own trauma. So she may be depressed because of the domestic violence or suffering from PTSD, preventing her from being the best mother that she could be. And this is in no way to blame the non-offending parent, but it is a reality that domestic violence interferes with one's ability to parent in the way that they want to, and it interferes with the ability to be kind of the best version of yourself as a parent. So it's also important to consider the abuser as a parent, to look at how children might be impacted when there is domestic violence in the home. So on the next slide, we see some of the parenting styles of an abuser. So just as an abuser is very controlling of their partner, that might kind of show up in their parenting style as well. So they may be very authoritarian, kind of a my way or the highway, and they may use intimidation to get the kids to kind of fall in line. On the flip side, they might be overly permissive. They may be the parent where there are no rules, there is no discipline, you know, whatever you want to do, go ahead, and then forcing the other parent to be the disciplinarian. So the abuser gets to kind of be the fun parent, and the non-offending parent kind of has to pick up the pieces. An abuser may control access to support systems like grandparents or family friends, again, in an effort to kind of keep that circle small, to keep others from finding out about the abuse, and to kind of be able to better control the members of the family. And ultimately, the effect that this has on children is it limits the number of caring, safe adults that are present in that child's life. An abuser might just kind of be an absent parent. They might have a totally hands-off approach. They might not be involved, which, given their abusive behavior, may be a blessing, but it also is sending that message to that child that they are unimportant, they are unloved or unwanted. So an important aspect too is that an abuser may kind of actively undermine the other parent by changing or contradicting their rules, fostering disrespect for the other parent. So they might say things like, oh, you know, you don't need to listen to her, you know, I'm in charge, which ultimately sends mixed messages to the child and can undermine that parent-child relationship. And lastly, abusers may manipulate the children, force them to choose sides between their parents and put them in kind of an impossible position. So we saw on that power and control wheel using children as a weapon. And that can often happen whether the parents are still together or even after a victim of domestic violence has left their abuser. If that parent still has visitation rights or partial custody, that's one way that an abuser can try and still have some control over their former partner. So they might not be able to control their partner anymore, but they can control them through the kids. So this can happen in a lot of different ways. We may see an abuser kind of fighting for custody. They might refuse to pay child support. They may kind of use the visitation schedule or even the court schedule as a way to control their partner's schedule. So that might mean showing up an hour late for their scheduled visitation and kind of derailing the whole day. Or on the flip side, they might show up an hour early for visitation and demand that the kids be ready right then and there. So it can be very disruptive to the whole family. Likewise, they might use the court system as a way to control their partner's schedule. So kind of filing multiple petitions for custody drawing out the legal process, by requesting adjournments. So there are a lot of ways that they can, if they can't directly control the partner, kind of using these other systems to have that same effect. We also have seen abusers making false claims to DCP&P of child abuse or neglect against the non-offending parent as a way to retaliate. So this is something that DCP&P caseworkers are very well aware of, and as advocates, it's something that we work to support the non-offending parents with as well, so that the non-offending parent is not held responsible for the actions of the abuser. But all of this can really undermine the parent-child relationship. And even if these tactics are meant to kind of get back at or control an abuser's former partner, ultimately it's the kids who are feeling the immediate impact of that. So how are children impacted by domestic violence? And so specifically, or kind of generally rather, childhood trauma in general, what are the impacts of that? And I know you just had a presentation on adverse childhood experiences, so I'm not gonna go too much in depth. I could talk for hours about this, but I'm gonna just try and do kind of a general overview in the interest of time. So when we think of childhood trauma, there are so many different areas of a child's development that are impacted by trauma. I'll kind of highlight brain development as one of the areas, because that has a ripple effect, and that's going to then impact behavioral control, cognitive ability, emotional regulation, etc. So when there is trauma, when there is toxic stress and prolonged exposure to that toxic stress, such as domestic violence in the home, a child's stress response system is going to be kind of on high alert and repeatedly activated. So that fight, flight, or freeze response, which is designed to protect a child, actually starts to kind of work against them. So when those stress hormones and stress chemicals are being released, and their body is being flooded with these chemicals, there are long-lasting impacts. So prolonged exposure to cortisol, adrenaline, can actually change the structure and function of a child's developing brain. So when they're kind of repeatedly being flooded with these chemicals, their developing bodies just can't handle it. And it's also worth noting that this stress response system starts to kind of misfire a little bit. So when it's repeatedly activated, a child is going to start registering threats where there may not actually be a threat, but they're triggered by past traumatic experiences. So they're going through that full stress response system again, and it's kind of compounding those issues. So we see less efficient processing in the brain. The portions of the brain that are fear responses become developed at the expense of areas of the brain that are critical for learning, memory, attention, impulse control. So it has effects then on behavior, on cognitive ability, how they're doing in school. It can impact their social relationships. So when you think about all of these different domains being impacted, a kid's going to be having trouble at school. They might be calling out more because they don't have that behavioral control. So they might be getting sent to the principal's office more frequently. They might have a harder time making friends, which ultimately is going to impact how they feel about themselves. So their self-esteem is going to take a hit, and their beliefs about themselves are going to be impacted as well. So the next slide just shows a few more of these impacts. And then we'll look kind of more specifically at the impact of domestic violence in particular. So there are several different factors that impact how children are affected by domestic violence in the home. So on the next slide, we see that there are several factors here at play. One is the severity and frequency of the abuse. So is this something that was happening, on a daily basis, a weekly basis? That's going to impact a child more severely than if this was a less frequent occasion. Likewise, if it was severe physical abuse, that's going to impact a child pretty heavily as well. What was the child's proximity to the abuse? Were they right there as an eyewitness, or were they removed from the immediate situation? How long did the abuse go on? Was this sort of all a child has ever known for their whole lives? Or was the abuser possibly a boyfriend of mom and not in the picture for a long time? That will change how a child is impacted as well. And then finally, the age or developmental stage of the child when the abuse occurs has a big impact on that child as well. And unfortunately, we saw earlier on that younger children tend to be exposed to domestic violence more frequently. They also are going to be impacted more severely than older children. So I wanted to just kind of go through how different developmental stages and different ages may be impacted by abuse. So starting with infants and toddlers, there may be negative impacts of domestic violence kind of right from the start, unfortunately. In cases where there is emotional, physical, or sexual abuse during pregnancy, the fetus actually can be impacted in utero. So the stress hormones that are released by the mother can actually be passed on to that developing baby through the umbilical cord or through the placenta. So those stress hormones then can enter the fetus's brain. So there then can be long-term consequences developmentally for that child. Another impact is, so we may see premature birth, we may see a lower birth weight, and there may actually be a smaller head circumference, which indicates less brain development. So all of that will then have developmental implications down the road. When there is domestic violence present for an infant or toddler, their sleeping and eating routines can be disrupted, which is about 90% of what an infant is doing is sleeping and eating. So that can in turn create longer lasting issues as well. One of the reasons that infants and toddlers are perhaps more negatively affected than older children has to do with this being a critical age for brain development. So 0 to 3 is just constant brain development, neural pathways being connected. And so when all of those experiences are related to the trauma, again, those are the areas of the brain that are developing at the expense of healthy development of areas of the brain that are critical for learning, emotional regulation, etc. So another impact here with infants and toddlers is it can cause difficulty attaching to the caregiver. So that early attachment is really the foundation for all future relationships. So a baby forms secure attachment with its primary caregiver when the baby's needs are consistently met. So when a baby cries, mom comes and picks the baby up, rocks the baby, changes his diaper, feeds him, whatever it is that the baby needs. When those needs are consistently met, secure attachment is formed. The baby learns that when I have needs, they are met. The world is a safe place. It's a predictable place. I can trust other people. And ultimately they'll internalize that to know that they can trust themselves, and they will eventually be able to self-soothe. When there is domestic violence present, it often is not possible for that primary caregiver to consistently meet those needs. And again, this is no fault of the non-offending parent. If she is injured or is depressed going through her own trauma, it might be more, she might not be able to soothe the baby right then and there. And so the baby is not developing that secure attachment. And if the mother is going to pick up the baby and she herself is dysregulated because she is being threatened or she is being abused, her dysregulation can actually frighten the baby. So the baby then has kind of two choices. They learn that I can cry out and be met with a potentially unsafe response, or I cannot cry and not have those needs met. So that can have longer lasting implications in terms of other relationships and the ability to trust others as well. So for infants and toddlers, because of the basic developmental milestones and developmental tasks that they're going through, when those are interrupted, it can have longer lasting impacts. So as we're moving into the preschool stage, you might start to see some greater physical complaints. So they might not have the words to tell you that they're worried or to tell you that they're scared. That might show up as a stomach ache or a headache. There might be some regression, some clinginess, separation anxiety. It's also at this stage, children are very egocentric. Developmentally, that's appropriate. The world revolves around them. So they actually may feel like the abuse is their fault. They might feel responsible, especially if they overhear their name in an argument. So children at this age are excellent observers, but poor interpreters. They don't have the context to understand that this is abuse. They may feel that, it's their fault, they left their toys out, and this is what happened as a result. So on the flip side, they may feel that they have the power to stop the abuse by yelling at the abuser. They also, if they need to leave the home to seek safety, they won't understand why they're leaving. So they may have a lot of grief over missing their old home, any toys that they left behind, or any friends that they left in their old neighborhood. So as we look ahead to school age kids, so kind of that 6 through 12, we may start to see more behavioral problems, more problems at school. They might have a harder time making friends. We might see kind of that switching back and forth between being very eager to please, trying to keep the peace, and being very hostile or even aggressive with their peers. So they're learning kind of problem solving skills and conflict skills at home that when there's a problem, you solve it with violence. So that might be reflected on the playground at school. Kids this age also are starting to identify more with their same-sex parent. So they're starting to kind of generalize about and learn about gender roles. So they may start stereotyping men as abusers and women as victims if that's what's being reflected at their home. And then as we move into adolescence, these behaviors can have greater consequences. So their behaviors might be more dangerous and risky. We might see experimentation with drugs and alcohol, skipping school, engaging in early sex. So all of these can have pretty severe consequences for teenagers. They also may feel that it's their job to take care of their mother or their younger siblings. So they might kind of step into that parentified role where it's kind of all on them, which is a huge burden for a teenager. Their dating relationships, as they start to date, their relationships might reflect those same, the violence that they learned or witnessed at home. So when there has been domestic violence in the home, those children are more likely to be in an abusive relationship themselves. So the next slide, I'm just gonna kind of highlight quickly in the interest of time. Even within the same family, children may be impacted very differently by domestic violence. And part of that depends on kind of the family dynamics at play, and kind of the role that they have taken on, or the role that has kind of been imposed upon them. So a child might be kind of the caretaker, taking care of the younger siblings. They may be the one that mom kind of talks to about what's going on. So they might have just a ton of information about the abuse that is really inappropriate for a child their age, and kind of feeling that burden and that powerlessness. Sometimes children will kind of take on that perfect child role, trying, if I, get straight A's, if I, cook dinner every night, if I make sure that, the little ones are taken care of, then I can prevent any of this from happening. And ultimately, or finally, oftentimes children can be kind of identified as the cause for the problem. So they might be the scapegoat, and blamed for any tension between parents. So oftentimes this may be a child with special needs, or it may be a stepchild of the abuser. So they're kind of an easy target. So depending on the family role, that's going to impact how a child is affected by the abuse at home. So some of the long-term effects of growing up with domestic violence, these children are 74% more likely to commit a violent crime against someone else. They're 6 times more likely to attempt suicide, and more likely to abuse alcohol, and they are 3 times more likely to repeat the cycle in adulthood. So the next slide just shows some strategies for supporting children. So how can we help? A few strategies are trying to help create a predictable world with structure, routine, clear expectations, because that helps children feel safe. So kids might not talk about what's bothering them, but paying attention to those nonverbal cues can really open up the dialogue for what might be going on for them internally. Avoiding those power struggles, and also it's important to kind of teach children what to do instead of just teaching them what not to do. So sending the clear message that violence is always a choice and it is not the child's fault. Teaching them better skills to deal with conflicts so that they are not resorting to violence. And then to kind of end on a more positive note, what are some of the protective factors? So how can we build that resilience in children to help mitigate some of the effects of domestic violence? So all of these are protective factors for kids: having a strong cultural identity, being part of a greater community, and having more supportive adults, social supports in their lives, and things like having access to healthcare, stable housing, and economic stability are all big protective factors for children. Having affiliations with either a supportive religious or faith community, or belonging to a team, scouts, anything that increases the number of healthy relationships in that child's life will be a protective factor. There are a number of personal traits, a strong sense of self-efficacy, independence, that ability to form those positive relationships. That is a big boost to kids as well. And then the single most important factor in fostering resilience in children is the presence of one single caring, competent adult. So that might be a parent, it might be a teacher or a coach, it might be a counselor or a mentor, but just having that one dependable adult that they can go to is so crucial in building resilience in children. So I know I talked a lot about the negative impacts of domestic violence, but I want to be clear that that is not, it is not kind of a certainty. It is not, it's not all doom and gloom. So I am constantly amazed at how resilient the children that I work with are, and kind of looking for those opportunities to increase their self-esteem, increase their self-competency. There are a lot of opportunities for resilience and growth. And then just a little bit about the children's program at Womanspace. We work with kids ages 5 through 18. And we have the non-offending parent connected with counseling services first, because children start to heal when their parent starts to heal. So when that parent can be that strong, safe, competent adult, then the children begin to feel that those same healing effects as well. So I know that was a lot of information, and I want to make sure that if there are any questions or comments that I can address those as well.
Well, Abigail, I just definitely want to thank you for providing such great information.
My pleasure.
And, you know, it is important that we talk about, there's so many important topics these days that are pushing to the forefront, you know, around, you know, adverse child experiences, domestic violence that many different people experience. But how we can build a safe space for ourselves and come out of it.
Exactly.
And you can come out of it. That's
exactly. There is hope. There are resources out there, and there is healing.
Yeah. So just a couple of questions. Someone said, how long can someone stay at the facility? How long?
So for our safe house, there's not a time limit in terms of number of days. We have caseworkers there. It is designed to be shorter term, but we have caseworkers there that are advocating for individuals to get connected with longer term housing. So it's not 30 days and you're out. It is designed to be shorter term, but there are safety nets in place to help that person then find longer term housing.
Okay, and then how can we help a child build trust when both parents are not helpful to the child?
So helping that child, being there, believing them, listening to them, and just showing up for that child helps that child learn that there are healthy relationships and to slowly be able to trust other people. And to one of the ways that we do that is by providing training to teachers, to coaches, to anyone who might be interacting with kids. So often these kids kind of get mislabeled as ADHD, that they have behavioral problems. So kind of giving kids the benefit of the doubt, and a kid that is giving you a hard time is having a hard time. So being patient, just showing up for them and not reinforcing that message that they're a bad kid, because they're getting that message from all over.
Exactly. Behaviors learned.
Yes. Yep.
So that was it for the question. So again, we want to thank you for such great information.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And, over the past 2 days, we've given people a lot of information around mental health, stress and self-care, and we did the ACEs and then domestic violence. And so, really kind of wrapping everything up into kind of a nice bow. I like to do quotes. So, I always like to give people quotes to walk away with, because it's sometimes when you're going through things, sometimes it's those words, whether it's said by someone verbally or just a quote. Yesterday, I shared the self-love quote, and here's a couple of more quotes that I usually put together and I share with people. She builds others up because she knows that it's what is torn down. And, and we know that particularly around women and domestic violence, there's that feeling, the torn down feeling, and really building some people up. And then one of the most dangerous things is a woman knows her self-worth. And we sometimes lose that when we're in situations and we don't understand what our worth is. And then I'll read one more. A person's most useful asset is not a head full of knowledge, but the heart full of love, and the ear ready to listen, and a hand willing to help others. And I like what you said about, and it's so true that we can't tell a woman to leave, but we can listen, and we can listen with our heart, and we can be there as a helping hand for that woman or person who's dealing with those things. So again, we want to thank everyone that has some people have been here for both days, some people have been here for different days, but we really want to thank everyone for being here and receiving this really great 2-day information from really wonderful speakers that we have had. Jeannie, you have anything else to say?
Just thank you. Thank you, Abigail, and thank you to Aldina, who has left the meeting a little earlier, and thank you to everyone for participating. This was a change for us this year. We usually do this summit in person with lunch together, so we'll have to have lunch on our own this year, but you know, I'm really happy that we all had this time to share and to get, you know, all of this very, very important information. Our speakers will send you the speakers' information if you want to be in touch with them for, you know, for more information. And we will answer all of the questions if we haven't done so already, and we'll get those out to you. And I think you mentioned, Nicole, this forum today will be uploaded to SPAN's YouTube channel.
Yeah, yes, it has been streamed on Facebook, but it will be, both of them will be uploaded to the YouTube channel at some point in time within the next week or so.
Terrific. So you can feel free to revisit it again or pass it on to colleagues who or families who you think might find this information helpful and useful. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe and cool. And we will be in touch soon.